What's going on, people? Myke C Town here. So, I've been toying with the idea of doing this video for quite some time, and what really sealed it was the other day, one of my favorite bands from high school, they did a reunion show, which was amazing, and I was watching them and thinking, like, where would I have been as a kid without these guys? And that got me to thinking about all the other bands who shaped my life, especially as a youth and a young adult. And I started thinking, like, where would I be without these bands? So I want to do a list of the most influential albums that changed my life. And to be very, very clear, this is not a best of list. This is not a list of my all-time favorite albums. And even though I'm saying this, I know I'm still going to get a bunch of these ridiculous comments saying, you know, how are you going to leave this band out? And what about this album? And, you know, this album's better than that album. It doesn't fucking matter. These are the albums that changed my life. Not yours, mine. So yeah, let's just get into the list. Number 15, Christian Death, Only Theater of Pain. I heard this somewhere around 1996. I had no idea what goth was when I first heard this album, and there was this kid that was living at the house that did the punk and hardcore and emo house shows, and we went record shopping one day, and he picked this album up, and I flipped through the inside of the album, and I saw these pictures of Roz Williams and Rick Agnew and James McGearty, and I knew that this was something special. And it started not just my love for goth music, but my love of darker music in general. Number 14, Hank Williams Jr., Whiskey Bitten Hellbound. I heard this somewhere around 1995 when I was still in high school, and some people don't know how much of a country music fan I am, and this album is the one that really started it, you know, and I can't remember where I got it from, but I remember the very first song that I ever heard by Hank Williams was the one he did with Ray Charles, Two Old Cats Like Us. But I didn't get that particular album. I can't remember the name of it now, but I got this album, and I loved it, man, and it led me to all of the greats like Merle Haggard, George Jones, Willie Nelson, Johnny Paycheck, Johnny Cash, you know, Waylon Jennings, all the guys, and it made me realize that there was another side of country music outside of Garth Brooks. You know, this was music that was actually good. Number 13, Nature and Organization, Beauty Reaps the Blood of Solitude. I remember this like it was yesterday, man. This was somewhere around 2000 or 2001, and my boy Henry Derrick, he was a huge fan of this weird neo-folk stuff, and would tell me about this band, Current 93, and I can't remember if he actually loaned me a copy of the actual album, or if he made me a dub of it, but Nature and Organization is the main project of Michael Cashmore, who was a frequent collaborator and guitar player for Current 93, and I'd never listened to neo-folk. When I put this on and it started with Willow Song, it was totally eye-opening. It was beautiful, but when it moved into Bloodstream Runs, which is the first time I'd ever heard David Tibet's voice, it absolutely blew my mind, man. And this led me into investigating everything David Tibet was attached to, including Current 93, which quickly became my favorite band. So this album still holds a very, very special place in my heart. Number 12, Carcass Heartwork. This was the first death metal album I'd ever actually enjoyed. I was mainly listening to hardcore in 94, even though it was the heavier side of hardcore. And I remember my friend Andy, he heard some of the stuff that I liked and was like, dude, you need to hear Carcass. I really think you'd like it. And at first I was against it because I thought death metal was fucking stupid. I heard Cannibal Corpse, I'd heard Deicide, and even though I'd end up liking those bands a little bit later on first listen, I thought all that stuff was garbage. But Carcass's Heartwork, it totally changed my mind. It was the riffs, the vocals, the power, the overall feel of that album, and after this, I fell in love with death metal. Like, all of it. Number 11, Operation Ivy's self-titled album. This was the first punk album that I ever heard, man, so this kind of started it all. This was probably in 1994, I'd say. This kid I used to skate with named John, he made me a cassette dub of the album, and I'd never heard anything like this before, and it blew me away, man. It exposed me to punk rock as a whole, and without that, I don't know where I would be, but it led me into investigating stuff like NoFX, Bad Religion, Screeching Weasel, Propagandhi, all of those bands, and it led me to finally being okay with being a weirdo. Number 10, Company Flow, Funk Crusher Plus. So for a while, I'd totally given up on hip-hop. I couldn't connect with it anymore, and it really didn't speak to me on any level. But a certain record brought me back, a record I'll talk about later on in this list. But this particular record, Funk Crusher Plus, is what exposed me to a type of hip-hop that I didn't even know existed. That super underground kind of oddball spectrum of rap music And my roommate Scott, he discovered this album and played it for me in his car one day, and I'd say probably in 1999. And I thought it was cool, but it was later on, maybe about a year, when I actually picked it up for myself and I realized the genius that this album is. The beats, the rhymes, the concepts, nothing was like this. And of course, this introduced me to my all-time favorite MC, which is LP, but it also led me into the world of Def Jux and Rhymesayers and Anacon, you know, so stuff like Aesop Rock, Cage, C-Ray's Walls, Tame One, Atmosphere, Soul, Dose One, all these guys, Alias. And I don't know that I would have ever found any of that stuff without hearing that particular album. Number 9, Cradle of Filth, Dusk and Her Embrace. And yeah, I'm sure this is gonna get a lot of shit, but I really don't fucking care. I started listening to black metal in 1996, and this is the earliest album that I remember listening to. And some of you guys would never want to admit that such a lame band opened you up to the genre, but I don't give a shit about how many cool cult points I lose for this. Sure, this band is lame now, and it's even fun to make fun of this album, but when it came out, it opened up a lot of people's worlds, man. A lot of us had never heard anything like this. We didn't even know what the fuck it was. All we knew was it was fucking cool, man. It just sucked me in, and then it led me to picking up random black metal albums all over the place, and that included the Blackened comp, which opened me up to Satyricon, Dark Funeral, Emperor, Impaled Nazarene, Mayhem, Immortal, all of the greats. And I don't know factually that I would have ever cared about black metal had I not heard this album in high school. 8, Casual, Fear Itself. I spoke earlier about an album that brought me back to hip-hop after walking away from it for a while, and this is that album. I heard the song Lose in the End on the Sean Sheffy part of the Plan B virtual reality video. This was back in 1993. And the song was stuck in my head, man. I couldn't get it out, and I ran out and I bought the cassette immediately, and I was like, holy shit, what is this type of rap? Like, how do I find more of this? And then I ended up buying everything that I could see that was in the thanks list of the cassette. So I ended up buying all of the stuff from the Hyro crew, Dell, Souls of Mischief, Extra Prolific. And then I started getting into stuff like Razkaz and Farside, and who knows if I'd even be bothering with hip-hop today if it weren't for hieroglyphics, especially Casual and Dell. So that album is still one of the greats to me, and it means a lot to me. Number 7, Suicidal Tendencies, Lights, Camera, Revolution. What's so special about this album is it was the first album that really got me into metal or heavier music in general. I didn't know shit about metal before hearing this album in 1993. And I had a copy of Whitesnake's Slip of the Tongue that I got from my dad, but I just thought that was just rock and roll. And that should really be on this list too, but this album is really what showed me what heavy guitars were like, with that double kick and that power, all that was like. And this still remains one of my all-time favorite albums and one of my all-time favorite bands. Number 6, Atmosphere, God Loves Ugly. It's fairly simple what this album did for me. You know, I was already digging hip-hop by this point, but I was really not sold on the content for most albums, but this one changed that. This was in 2002 when the album dropped, and I remember finding it on an Amazon list back when they still used to do those, but I bought it, and this album showed me that you could be an emotional man in rap music. It showed me that having feelings and displaying vulnerability was totally okay. And what was so special about this album was you had a guy, Slug, who showed his emotional side but was still cool as shit. He was still smooth even though he was awkward, and he was just nasty on a microphone. So he showed a truly multifaceted MC for the first time for me, one who displayed the various aspects of a man, and this was really important for a weird kid like me back then. Number 5, Fishbone, Truth and Soul. I heard this stuff before I actually heard punk rock, and I discovered a Bonin' in the Boneyard single in a box of CDs that my sister had left in the garage when she moved. This was in probably 1991, and I didn't know what kind of music this was, but I knew it was awesome. You know, I knew it was a bunch of weird-ass black dudes playing this weird-ass music, and it simply made me, as a weird-ass black dude, feel a little bit less weird. And I went out and I bought this tape when I discovered that it had Bonin' in the Boneyard on it, and I just ended up loving this album, and I still love this album. And what this did for me is it made me realize that black kids who weren't only into hip-hop and R&B, had other options outside of Jimi Hendrix. And that was really, really important for 13 and 14-year-old me. Number 4, Chokehold, Content with Dying. This was the Canadian hardcore band that epitomized PC in the 90s, and what this album did when it dropped in 95 was it opened me up to all the details of liberal politics. So it made me actually start thinking about things like women's rights, abortion, rape politics, racism, gay rights, religious criticism especially, and it showed that hardcore kids had more to be angry about than fucking straight edge and veganism. You know, there were a lot of things going on in the world that we had to be pissed off about, and Chokehold kind of pointed impressionable kids like me in the right direction, so I thank them for that, and this is still one of my top 10 favorite hardcore albums of all time. Number 3, Earth Crisis, Firestorm. There was just no way in hell that this was not going to be on the list, man. This EP totally revolutionized my entire life when I discovered this. I remember my boy Brad, he brought it over to my house in probably 1994 and was like, you need to hear this. And I listened to it and it triggered something in me, man. Of course, the song Firestorm was the straight edge anthem in those days. These dreams of cleansing neighborhoods of drug dealers by any means necessary. You know, shit that we really didn't understand. What made this EP so special for me is the song Eden's Demise. This is the song that actually made me go vegan. And I always say that everyone comes to that crossroads where they realize what our food is. You know, we realize that hamburgers are cows, bacon is pigs, and we either care and we change, or we simply don't. And I cared and I changed. And it was the line, mass murder, demonic cruelty, absolute fascism, to end the enslavement and slaughter, the antidote is veganism. Don't let your outrage for injustice end where your selfishness begins. And that was real as fuck to me back then. You know, it really made me think. And it's a sentiment that to this day, I still hold, man. Veganism is the single most important thing that I pulled from the hardcore scene. And I'm glad to have been straight edge when I was, but as you guys know, it didn't stick. And I still love and respect straight edge, but straight edge really doesn't have any worldly big picture effect like veganism does. So for opening my eyes to veganism, man, this record will always, always hold a special place for me. And it's still just fucking awesome moshness. Number 2, The Cure of Disintegration. The reason this album changed my life is because I heard it during a time when I was really depressed. This was in like 94 or 95. I was this weird kid living in a new place where I wasn't accepted by anyone, and punk did a great job of saying, you know, we're weird, we know it, we don't give a fuck, and fuck you. And that was an important message, but it wasn't a message that always resonated. Robert Smith's words were, I'm sad, you're sad, let's be sad together. And it wasn't a fuck you for making me feel weird, it was a fuck these feelings for making me feel weird, and fuck this world for not having the answers to make me feel better. And that album is still one of my all-time favorite albums, and I honestly can't say where I would be now had I never heard that album. Alright, so the number 1 pick is going to be really odd for a lot of you guys, but I'll try to make it make sense. Number 1, New York Hardcore, The Way It Is. This was a comp of New York hardcore bands that my buddy Brad, he got a hold of, I don't remember how, but he gave me a copy of it, and this had to be again in 94. This was technically the first hardcore album I'd ever heard, and it had bands like Youth of Today, Warzone, Gorilla Biscuits, Bold, Sick of It All, Nausea, all these bands that I would later on love. And this was all of a sudden this music that spoke to me, man, and it spoke to me loud. I had never felt a part of something or even had the serious urge to be a part of something until I found hardcore. And I actually felt that I had a place to belong. And it felt so good, man. I had friends who all shared common interests with me. We were all nerds, outcasts, and fucking losers. And no one could judge anyone else because we were all in the same fucking boat, man. And I feel like I would have never found this scene without Brad and without this album. I would have never found the confidence to proudly display my individuality without this album. I've spoken a ton about how punk and hardcore changed me, and yeah, this album was the catalyst for that, and I still love it to this day. I put it on and it takes me immediately back to the 90s, to feeling like, holy shit, this is a revelation And that was not a pun on the fact that it was on Revelation Records. I'm still a dork. Anyway, that's it. I'd love to see some other guys make videos like this. If you don't make videos, fuck it, man. Make a list and drop it in the comment section. What albums changed your life? What albums have you heard that without them, you think you'd be a totally different person today? Let's talk about it. Yeah, as usual, thank you for living, thank you for loving, thank you for being you. Please don't die, and I'll see you guys next time. All right? Peace, bitches.